U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is making his second trip to China on Saturday. No doubt the nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula will be a topic high on the agenda ahead of the Xi-Trump summit expected in November in China. Recently, there's been another war of words at the United Nations. The U.S. and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea traded threats at the world's biggest multilateral organization. President Trump claimed that his country will have no choice but to totally destroy the DPRK unless Pyongyang refrains from its nuclear tests and missile launches, while the DPRK's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho said that Trump's threats rendered the sacred UN arena tainted, calling the U.S. president a mentally deranged person. The DPRK's top leader Kim Jong-un also vowed to retaliate, saying Trump will face results beyond his expectation. Are these raging words leading to a war? And what are the concerns of all parties at this critical moment? Joining us in our studio are Professor Su Ge, President of China Institute of International Studies, and political affairs commentator Einar Tangen. Welcome to both gentlemen here. But before we start the discussion, let's take a look at what Trump said about the DPRK during his first presence at the UN General Assembly.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
I think this was quite unprecedented to hear this kind of undiplomatic language on the arena, on the podium of the world's most diplomatic arena, the United Nations. Professor Su, what was your reaction when you heard what President Trump said?
My first reaction from this is that this is the United Nations, because you won't be able to hear emotionally charged words, exchange words like that. Just now in the introduction, you hear like a war exchange of words, and the people, when you hear these words, suddenly your mind is thinking that the situation is escalating, and with this exchange of words, you think that what's going to happen next. And then also the Twitter message too. This country won't last long, and then we have no other choice but to totally destroy North Korea. And the North side wouldn't show any fear. They indicate that they even actually indicate the possibility of maybe test another hydrogen bomb in the international waters. So what that would lead to, so I think everybody, when hearing this, legitimately they need to be worried.
Sure, and I always wonder, how do we get here? I mean, this was, of course, the situation has been building up for many years. Of course, the tension has always been there, but somehow we are going further and further in kind of a dead-end street. Einar, what was your impression?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the Clinton years, there was a failure to follow through after he left, and then Bush came in, and then it became the axis of evil. And this really has set the stage for what we see today. It's very difficult to back down. You know, in reality, what you have are two people who, in many ways, are the same. Both came from very privileged families. Both have never really had anybody say no to them. And they believe that they can...
You mean President Trump and Mr. Kim?
Yes, they come from almost exactly the same type of things. They come from families of privilege where they have, in essence, been spoiled. They've been given what they wanted. They do pretty much as they please. They believe, both of them believe, that they are the center of attention of the world.
And they believe in what they do. They believe that they are right.
Well, I don't... It's not clear that right enters into it. I think they believe that they're doing what's best for them, and that somehow what is best for them is best for their countries. I don't know that everybody would agree with that. So when you start talking about how we got here, it's been a progression of loss of trust. Because what has happened, and I don't know how you'd feel about this, but even if the U.S. sat down with North Korea, after what happened in the Middle East, with the leaders there in Iraq and then Libya, that no one's going to trust the U.S. if they say, look, give up your nuclear weapons, we promise to do this, that, and the other thing. There probably wouldn't be, I mean, even the Russians feel that somehow the U.S. and Europe misled them in terms of expanding NATO and also European economic influence into the Eastern Zone. So there's a trust deficit here, which is really important to acknowledge. Yeah. And then the question is, where do you go from here? I don't think that these two trains, which seem to be speeding directly at each other, can be derailed by them simply sitting down and talking because of this trust deficit. So from my perspective, there has to be something else, and quite possibly, and I don't know how you think, China might have to take a more active role by, in essence, saving face for everybody by going forward and saying, listen, perhaps we, China, will guarantee North Korea's security. This takes the issue away from Donald Trump. He hasn't had to give anything up. China emerges as a peacemaker, world leader, and perhaps Pyongyang believes China more than it would the U.S.
Well, you are not the first one from whom I've heard this opinion that China can actually act as some kind of a guarantor of the security of DPRK, so that they would have some sense of security in case they so that they can start thinking about giving up their nuclear deterrence. Is that the same thing?
Yes, but I think it would have to be a quid pro quo. If China did that, I think even China would insist that the nuclear program absolutely stop, that it be verified, that there be international or at least Chinese ability to do so.
Professor Su, is that a viable option?
Well, I don't think that you need to have all the responsibilities on the back of China. China, I think, in the North Korean nuclear issue and the security stability of the peninsula, China has been acting with the full responsibilities, and we have been carrying out United Nations Security Council resolutions. We have put forward proposals for both the United States and North Korea. Just now, Tongan said they used the metaphor first used by Minister Wang Yi, saying that you two are just like, because the contradiction, the issue in essence actually is a contradiction between the United States at one end and DPRK on the other. You two are like rushing, like trains, speeding trains, rushing at each other. And for China's role, we are willing to work as a switchman. Hopefully, we can offer suggestions accepted by all. But up till now, I don't think that these United States and North Korea have given us a satisfactory answer. Another thing is that when you think of the security issue, I think the United States also has probably the first and foremost, they have the responsibility to think about it. If you think of the security of North Korea, and they may divide their security concerns into two categories. One is the existence of the regime of the country, and the other is economic security. For my personal opinion is that each country has its ways for economic progress, for lifting up the people's living standards. For China, the market reform to open into the outside world has worked for China. And we hope that, I wouldn't say this is a model, hope that people in the region will see that economic progress and development would pave way for future peace and stability in the country, or vice versa. Peace and stability would also provide for conditions for economic progress. But for security guarantee, like Tongan said, that in the United States, eventually we have to wait for a time. We first come for the open the door, pave the way for six-party talks. Eventually, we hope that there will be an exchange of the old 1953 armistice with the new peace treaty between the United States and North Korea.
Well, I'm just going to, I'm not saying that this is China's fault. Quite the opposite. China just finds itself in a situation. And unfortunately, China finds itself in the situation where you have two children, all right, and China is trying to be the adult in the room, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, you have, name calling? This, what does this mean? I mean, whether it's at the UN or by tweet or by things, this kind of thing just cannot
But do you
forward.
think the U.S. is really the child in the room, or it just pretends to be a child in the room? I doubt that President Trump does not know the kind of consequence of what he is doing by, calling names and further.
But no, when you say he doesn't know the consequences, he does know the consequences, but in a very narrow way. That speech was not to the international community. That speech was to his base in the U.S. All right, he's trying to shore up what is an unpopular presidency, and he uses his tweets, he uses his opportunities at the United Nations to directly address and put red meat before his base. They loved his speech. They said, "Oh, this is wonderful. He's finally standing up for us." The rest of the world was appalled. I mean, there's no one out there who's saying Donald Trump isn't pouring oil on a fire that's already too large. Right? So when you say he knows the consequences of it, he is somebody who, like him, is very dependent on this kind of collective adoration. I mean, every time you see Kim, people are, literally crying and calling out his name. When you see Trump, when is he most comfortable? When he is at some sort of rally where people are calling in refrain to whatever he says.
But there's no hope for this situation to go for the better if you have both leaders acting like this.
Exactly.
Just serving their own self-domestic interest.
That's why we feel that if things like this, the consequence is that there might be an escalation of tension. And of course we know that as the old Chinese saying goes, if a piece of ice 3 feet deep, it takes more than 1 day for it to be formed, and it takes more than 1 day for it to be thawed. For this decade-old quandary, we need to have patience, we need to have time, but the general direction is very important, because China, I think, is realistic. We know that it's unrealistic just to tell the Koreans that you stop this instantly, and we have to. Then that's why the Chinese side put forward like suspension for suspension. Sure. What about you suspend your military exercises in exchange for North Koreans' moratorium of their exercise? In this way, you open the door, you prepare for the talks. But that proposal
is rejected swiftly by Washington, D.C. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue that discussion. And you have been watching The Point with me, Yushin. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, and let's continue to talk about the dilemma facing China and Russia. For instance, we have been saying that we are against sanctions, and sanctions alone will not solve the problem. However, China and Russia have been on board, at least for the latest 2 rounds of UN sanctions that were adopted most recently after the DPRK test file, the 6 nuclear weapons, 6 nuclear tests. What is China's position here? China is against sanctions, but again, when there are new rounds of sanctions, we are on board.
This issue, I mean, the United Nations Security Council resolution contains 2 sets of elements. One is that sanctions DPRK's behavior, because the continued tests of the bombs and missiles is a serious violation of international norms and United Nations decisions. On the other hand, there is another part of the resolution which says that all parties concerned needs to, while you close doors, but you leave leave a window open somewhere, so that you indicate the only correct way for North Korea is for them to come to the negotiation tables. Just now you mentioned China and Russia. China and Russia did issue a joint something saying that the six-party talks is the only way to go. I think that for United States, China and Russia, these countries they have differences over this issue. But I emphasize they have a convergence of national interests, because China's views are three-pronged. Number one, peace. Number one, denuclearization of the peninsula. I think that this is agreed by both the United States and Korea. And we also say that we need a continuation of peace, stability of the whole region. That's also concurred by the other two parties. However, as for how to realize that final end, the United States has differences with others. China, Russia, especially China, we say that peaceful means, diplomatic means is the only way, is the only correct way. But Trump and the United States are saying that all options on the table. And then we are saying that, hey, when you have military options, think about the consequences. Because when the North say that they have capabilities to turn, I quote, Seoul into a sea of flames, they are not really bragging about it. So as for the cost, you have to think about it before you wage a war.
Well, basically when you're saying when military option is on the table, you're threatening the others, and like that you cannot have a constructive conversation.
Well, I think we need to look at something a little bit deeper, and that is everyone keeps talking about sanctions and how sanctions will bring North Korea to your knees, but I don't think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the level of the North Korean economy. We were talking earlier about if you go through the countryside, right, you go through areas where there are ox carts that are traveling the roads, oxes are pulling the plows. You have creeks with, frogs in them and naked children playing. There's no electricity. There are no cell phone towers, right? This is a very, very primitive economy. So when you say we're going to block oil, what does that mean to somebody who doesn't have a car or a generator, right? When you think it will, yes, affect people in the city. They won't have to be able to use their cars. They might have to use buses or something like this. But it's not going to affect the majority of the country because it simply doesn't. People in the U.S. are making an assumption that somehow North Korea operates even close to what the U.S. is, and that is not the situation. And it's a real pity that people don't understand that sanctions in this kind of environment are extremely limited.
Yeah, but still, how has these sanctions affected the economy of the DPRK? Because they have been under sanctions for a long time. And Professor Sui just traveled to that country, seeing it for yourself. How do you assess the effectiveness of sanctions in trying to reining the DPRK's military ambition so far?
Well, the scenes in DPRK, especially in the rural area, would remind me of 50 years ago, the Chinese countryside. Well, you have people, peasants, they use ox to pull the plows, and you have ox carts pulling manure for the fields and so on. But there is a big contrast between Pyongyang, between the city to the urban area and the countryside. And you see the streets are fairly wide, however, very few cars. Well, the sanctions, if you look at the deep level, whether they would have very much effects on the countryside, that will, people have to wait and see. Another thing I would like to talk about this issue is that there is a much deeper level of concern that is on the national security. The decisions are always made by the top leadership, but not by the rural countryside. Because the Trump is saying that now we are doing something legal while your tests of missiles and rockets, they are illegal. How can we exchange something legal with illegal things? That's U.S. rationale. But North Koreans, they said that this decision is correct for our national security, for our very existence. If we do not develop this, our fate will be like that of Saddam Hussein, and our fate will be like another Syria. So when you have big conferences, differences like this, confronting each other, it's really hard to find any solution. But we still say that do not give up hope. Let's just wait and then try to do to promote, to brainstorm, so that we hope that we still give peace a chance.
Yeah, but especially when the U.S. is also threatening to pull out of the Iran talks, it doesn't help, right? The kind of signal you're sending is, okay, we can negotiate long and hard, but in the end, it doesn't change anything. You can walk away.
This is that trust deficit that I'm talking about. The U.S. is not in a position to do that, and that's unfortunate. But it's not just this administration. Previous administrations engaged in the same thing, so it's lost. And that's where I'm saying that I really wish that everyone would come to the table.
But
I just don't know if it can happen.
What could be the ultimate solution to this problem? I mean, is the international is the United States and the countries who are wishing to achieve this through sanctions saying, let's put as much sanctions as possible and forcing the DPRK down to its knees? Is that going to happen? I mean, for Iran, for instance, again, similar situation, but the country sustained.
One says that if the sanctions, if that's the decision by the United Nations Security Council, then needs to be carried out to the letters. At the same time, we need to make efforts for peaceful negotiations. Otherwise, you only hold half of the key for the solution of the problem.
Are such efforts ongoing? And under this atmosphere, do you
think
if
you see two people fighting in the streets, if you cannot make them stop instantly, what about just make them calm down in the first place?
But that's not working. That is not working. And you have to consider, I think, the character of the leaders that are involved and what motivates them, as we've talked about before. I do think there has to be some creative thinking about this, and it goes beyond just simply asking the U.S. to grow up, come to the table and say, we won't put preconditions down. We'll sit down with you. Talking won't change anything. There's no reason for them not to come to the table. But if they're not going to, what else can you do? I think you have to looking outside that, and that it could be Russia that guarantees it.
Sure, but because all of this is so incomprehensible to some people, that there are this saying, some analysts are saying that the reason why the U.S. president is acting this way, and some of the people in his administration are advising him to act this way, is because to have the hotspot always boiling on the Korean Peninsula is actually to the interest of the United States, so that China can be contained, possibly Russia's attention can be kind of distracted as well. Therefore, there is no reason for them to quickly and once for all solve this Korean Peninsula issue. Professor Su, what is your reaction to such analysis?
You hear people with that sort of view, saying that there is this military-industrial complex in the United States.
Yes.
If you keep something under control, if you keep the tension
always there,
then there would be opportunity for in the military-industrial complex to sell more weapons.
Do you buy that?
To the reason. Well, I would say that in the United States, whether this is their true intention, then you ask the top leaders of the United States. But we do see that in the top U.S. leadership, you still have some voices like Tillerson, who said that we have this full nose. Our policy are such that we do not intend to change, to alter the regime, and we do not intend to send our military across the 38th parallel. We do not intend to facilitate an early reunification of the South by the South over the North. In this way, I think that if the U.S. continue to do something like that and followed by actions, that might pave the way for the final change of the situation.
But on this issue, does he speak for President Trump?
Yeah, that's exactly
that's
the
another question.
And quite frankly, he doesn't. I mean, there's a clear divergence. There's rarely in the entire history of the United States been so many cabinet officers who are clearly at odds with their own president, whether it's over candidates, whether it's over substantive issues. For some reason, Trump doesn't seem to care. He continues to go on. It's just unknowable what he's going to do. In terms of the military complex, you know, actions speak louder than the words. And what have the results been? When he's in Saudi Arabia, arms sale. When he went Qatar, arms sales. When he's gone to every single country, it's resulted in arms sales. So I do think this is playing in. But more than that, I think from the State Department's point of view, what they're trying to do is not only keep China busy, but put China in the spotlight and say it's anything that happens, no matter how bad it is, it's China's fault.
Yeah.
All right?
And even threatening to cut China off the dollar system.
Unilateral
cutting
exchanges.
trade with China.
That's a little bit more complex than simply North Korea, and that would involve the U.S.'s over $2 trillion worth of exports, which is not something that can be toyed with if you want the economy to expand.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, imagine, and how can you technically do that, cutting off China from the dollar system? I mean, China holds $1 trillion in U.S. debt. That's like almost 1/3 of the U.S. Treasury.
But this is the difficulty. This is what we're talking about. How is it that you can have a president who says things that does not make sense from the interests of his own country, who goes in front of the United Nations and makes these types of pronouncements and things like that? Sanctions don't appear like they're going to work. I mean, there's got to be some way of breaking the logjam, and I don't know that this president is the one to make it happen.
I think that all parties need to exercise restraint, because recently we see U.S. B-1 bombers flying over to somewhere close to the north, and then the north is threatening that now U.S. has declared war on us, and we have all rights to shoot down U.S. strategic bombers. So if things like this, I don't think are helpful to the solution.
The risks and miscalculations.
But on the other hand, the things you can't keep firing off missiles and exploding bombs and expect nothing to happen.
Exactly. So it's both sides are to blame, and something has to be done on that side. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Su Ge, President of the China Institute of International Studies, and Ina Tangen, our political affairs commentator. And here's my last point. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, because for the first time in its 11-year history, Twitter has announced it will begin testing a new limit of 280 characters. That's twice what they can currently use for all languages except Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. The social media platform has given rise to a unique type of rapid-fire conversations used extensively by celebrities and politicians like President Donald Trump. Apparently, customers will be randomly selected to be part of Twitter's beta testing group, which can use the 280 characters. And it makes me wonder if President Trump will be one of those lucky beta testers, and if so, whether we will see more unconstructive rants from the so-called leader of the free world. I wonder how the war of words could become even more exacerbated. But one thing remains clear to me is that the more President Trump can distract his electorate with painting the perils of an Asian country on the other side of the world from him, the less likely it is that people will stop and seek real answers to much more pressing problems closer to home. Or am I just being overly cynical? Well, that's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.